I thought it would be just another quiet evening at my teacher's house, but when her friend arrived, the way they both looked at me changed everything. I didn't expect the evening to feel different. I was only stopping by my old teacher's home to return a book she'd lent me. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just a familiar doorstep, a soft knock, and the comforting scent of brewed tea waiting on the other side. She opened the door with her usual warm smile. She was in her early 40s now, though time hadn't dulled her presence. If anything, it made her seem more centered, more graceful. There was something about the way she carried herself that always settled me, the way a storm quiets when you step inside. I thought it would just be the two of us. That's what made me pause when I stepped into her living room and noticed another woman sitting there. Her friend. She looked up at me with curious eyes, a touch softer, a little more reserved. She wasn't as openly animated as my teacher, but her stillness carried its own kind of weight. The two of them together filled the room with a quiet warmth, and suddenly I felt myself standing straighter, more aware of how I moved, how I spoke. "Come in," my teacher said gently, brushing her hand against my arm as she guided me inside. That small touch lingered longer than it should have, or maybe I just noticed it more tonight. The friend rose to greet me. She was close to my teacher's age, perhaps a little younger, her posture elegant but unassuming. When she smiled, it was the kind of smile that suggested she'd already taken my measure, like she'd noticed details I didn't even know I was giving away. "It's good to finally meet you," she said. Her voice was low, calm, with a kind of assurance that made me want to lean in to hear it again. We sat around the small wooden table near the window, a pot of jasmine tea between us. Steam curled upward, filling the room with a delicate sweetness. My teacher poured me a cup, and I realized both women were watching me with a quiet interest. Not judgmental, not impolite, but attentive, as if the space had subtly shifted the moment I walked in. It made my pulse pick up, though I tried to mask it with a smile. We talked lightly at first, about the weather, the book I'd brought back, the endless little details that keep conversation easy. But beneath the words, something unspoken hummed. Every now and then, I'd catch one of them holding my gaze for just a fraction longer than necessary. And once, when my teacher laughed, her friend's eyes drifted toward me with an expression I couldn't quite name. There was nothing inappropriate, nothing anyone else would have noticed. Yet I felt it, the subtle weight of being seen, not as a former student, not as a boy passing through, but as a man, sitting across from two women whose attention carried warmth and curiosity in equal measure. And as much as I tried to steady myself, I couldn't shake the thought. This night was going to unfold differently than I had imagined. If the beginning of the evening felt unusual, the conversation that followed made it stranger still, not in an uncomfortable way, but in a way that left me unsettled, as if I were walking into a rhythm I hadn't prepared for. The three of us sat around that small table, the lamp casting its golden circle of light across the wood. The jasmine tea cooled in our cups, though the steam still lingered faintly in the air. My teacher leaned forward, her elbow resting on the table as she laughed at some offhand remark I made. It wasn't anything clever, just a small observation about how I'd gotten lost on the way over, as I always seemed to. But the sound of her laughter rang fuller than I expected. Her friend smiled too, though differently. Where my teacher's amusement was open and bright, her friend's was subtler, almost private, as if she found something more in my words than I'd intended to give. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, her eyes not leaving me as she did so. That was when I realized how easily this was happening. The flow of it, the warmth of it. We spoke of small things, places we'd traveled, books we loved, the way the city seemed to change its skin every season. Yet beneath those simple topics, I felt their attention curling around me, steady and intentional. Every time I spoke, they leaned in slightly, their expressions lit with interest. I wasn't used to that. So often, people my own age looked past me, as if I were still figuring out who I was. But here, in this room, under their eyes, I felt seen in a way that made my chest tighten. At one point, my teacher reached across to emphasize a joke, her hand brushing lightly against my wrist. It was nothing, nothing at all. But my skin remembered the warmth long after her hand pulled away. Her friend noticed. I saw the faintest arch of an eyebrow, not in disapproval, but as if she, too, was taking note of the small current moving between us. Then, moments later, she leaned forward herself, resting her chin on her hand as she asked me about my plans, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. It should have felt like ordinary conversation, yet the way she asked left no space for pretense. She wasn't asking politely. She wanted to know. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the weight of my own words. And as I spoke, stumbling, searching, admitting more than I meant to, I caught the way both women listened. Not as mentors, not as older figures who might guide or correct me, but as equals, as if my thoughts mattered, as if I mattered. I found myself laughing more freely, speaking more openly, leaning forward as though the closeness between us was natural. Their voices wrapped around me like the low hum of music, and every so often, when their gazes lingered just a moment too long, I felt the room tilt in some delicate, unfamiliar direction. It was only conversation, yet it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. After an hour of warm conversation, the air in the room grew heavy with tea and lamplight. My teacher leaned back, stretching a little, and then glanced toward the window. The night pressed against the glass, cool and still, the faint shimmer of street lamps breaking the darkness. "Shall we take a walk?" she asked, her voice casual, though something in her expression suggested she wanted to shift the energy, to let the evening breathe. Her friend agreed with a quiet nod, and before I knew it, we were stepping out into the night. The street was hushed, nearly empty, the kind of silence that feels more intimate than any conversation. The cool air wrapped around us, carrying the faint scent of rain on stone, though no drops had yet fallen. I found myself walking between them, my hands tucked in my pockets, acutely aware of the closeness on either side. The rhythm of our footsteps echoed softly against the quiet. At times our shoulders brushed, a fleeting contact that sent tiny sparks running down my spine. My teacher walked confidently, her posture tall, her stride unhurried. Her friend's steps were gentler, yet somehow purposeful, as if she were measuring the night itself with each movement. For a while, we spoke lightly about the neighborhood, the small bookstore tucked around the corner, the cafe with unreliable hours, the old tree that leaned slightly across the street like it had grown tired of holding itself upright. But soon the words faded, and what remained was something else. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of glances, of breaths, of the subtle awareness that stretched between us like a thin thread. At one point, my teacher's hand brushed against mine. It was accidental, or at least it could have been. But the warmth of her skin against mine lingered far longer than the touch itself. I felt my pulse quicken, my mind searching for something steady to hold on to, though all I had was the night air and the sound of her soft laugh as she continued speaking as if nothing had happened. A few steps later, her friend slowed slightly, falling just enough into step with me that her shoulder pressed lightly against mine. She didn't move away. She just stayed there, as though testing the boundary of what was allowed. I found myself caught between them, two presences, two currents moving alongside me. I didn't lean into one or the other. Instead, I let myself be suspended in that delicate balance, the night holding us all in its quiet embrace. The street lamps cast long shadows, painting the pavement in pale gold. The world beyond seemed far away, as though it belonged to another life entirely. Here, in this small pocket of time, there was only the three of us, moving slowly through the quiet night, every touch and glance heavy with meaning I couldn't yet name. When we finally turned back toward the house, I realized something had changed. The walk itself hadn't been extraordinary. We hadn't said anything remarkable. And yet, the space between us felt charged, alive in a way that made me certain the evening was only just beginning. When we stepped back inside, the house felt different than before. The air was warmer, thicker somehow, as though the walk had stirred something unspoken between us. My teacher lit another lamp, softer this time, filling the living room with a low golden glow that seemed to hush the space. We settled back onto the sofa, the three of us close enough that our knees nearly brushed. The tea had cooled, forgotten on the table. For a few moments, none of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that waits, that asks you to notice it. Her friend was the first to break it. She turned toward me, her posture easy but her eyes steady. "So," she said softly, "what's next for you? You're young. You must be dreaming about where you'll go, what you'll do." The question should have been simple, but under her gaze it felt heavier, as though she wasn't asking about career or travel at all, but something deeper. I hesitated, searching for words. I don't really know yet," I admitted. "Sometimes it feels like people don't take me seriously. Like I'm just waiting for life to begin, while everyone else is already living it." The words surprised me even as they left my mouth. I hadn't meant to say that much. But there it was, sitting in the open between us. For a moment, the room was quiet again. Then my teacher shifted closer, her knee brushing mine as she leaned in. "You sell yourself short," she said gently. "You've always had a way of seeing things, of noticing details most people miss." Her voice was warm, steady, but I caught the glimmer of something vulnerable beneath it. Her friend nodded in agreement, her eyes never leaving mine. "We see you," she said simply. The way she said it, slow, deliberate, sent a quiet shiver through me. Those 3 words shouldn't have carried as much weight as they did, but suddenly my chest felt tight. My pulse thrummed in my ears. Because in that moment, I realized they weren't looking at me like a student or like someone passing through their lives. They were looking at me, as a man, as someone whose presence mattered. I tried to smile, but it faltered. "It's strange," I admitted, my voice low. "I never expected to feel understood like this. Especially not tonight." My teacher's hand came to rest lightly on my forearm. Her touch was feather soft, yet it anchored me more firmly than anything else could have. Her friend shifted slightly closer too, not touching me, but her nearness was enough to make the air feel charged. No one rushed to fill the silence that followed. We just sat there, their eyes on me, my skin alive with the memory of her touch, the weight of her friend's gaze. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. And yet it was. Each of us had admitted something without needing the words. And though nothing had been decided, I knew this night was already weaving threads I wouldn't be able to unravel. The night had slowed into a rhythm that felt almost dreamlike. The house was quiet, the lamps casting their soft pools of light, and the 3 of us remained close on the sofa, as though some invisible gravity held us there. I'd sat between them without thinking, but now I felt every detail of it, the faint warmth of their bodies on either side, the way the space around me seemed smaller, more intimate than it should have been. My pulse thrummed in the stillness, and I couldn't tell if it was nerves or something else entirely. My teacher leaned in first. She was telling a story from her travels, something about getting lost on a narrow street in Florence. And in the middle of her laughter, her hand came to rest lightly on my shoulder. Not in a fleeting way this time, but with a steadiness that lingered as she spoke. Her fingers pressed just enough to let me feel the curve of her palm through the fabric of my shirt. I laughed along, though my throat was dry. That simple touch sent a warmth rushing through me that words couldn't disguise. Then, almost as though balancing the moment, her friend shifted slightly closer. She didn't say much at first, only watched me with that calm, measured gaze of hers. But after a pause, she rested her hand gently over mine on the cushion. It wasn't bold or possessive. It was quiet, tentative, as though she was testing whether I would pull away. I didn't. The 2 touches were different. My teacher's was familiar, warm, like the steady comfort of sunlight. Her friend's was lighter, uncertain but electric, a quiet question I wasn't sure how to answer. And caught between them, I realized something I hadn't dared to consider until now. The pull I felt wasn't toward one of them alone. It was toward the connection they created together, the way both presences surrounded me and left me aware of every breath, every glance, every unspoken possibility. For a moment, the air grew heavy with silence. None of us moved. My teacher's laughter faded into a softer smile as she noticed where her friend's hand rested. Their eyes met briefly over me, not with jealousy, but with something more like recognition. A silent acknowledgement of the tension none of us had expected to find here tonight. I swallowed hard, my voice catching when I finally spoke. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Her friend's fingers gave the faintest squeeze against mine. My teacher's hand lingered on my shoulder, her thumb brushing once against the fabric, gentle and deliberate. "You don't have to do anything," she said softly. Her eyes held mine, steady, reassuring. It was such a simple answer, but it held me still. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't about choosing, not yet. It was about allowing the closeness, the warmth, the quiet acknowledgement that something rare was happening here, something none of us had planned but all of us could feel. And as we sat there, their hands anchoring me on either side, I knew the night had reached a turning point. Nothing explicit had been spoken, yet everything had been said. The room was so quiet that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The warmth of their touches lingered on my skin, my teacher's steady hand on my shoulder, her friend's gentle fingers resting over mine. I didn't move. None of us did. It felt like a fragile balance that might shatter if anyone breathed too deeply. Then, softly, my teacher laughed. Not with amusement exactly, but with a kind of release, as though the silence itself had grown too heavy. She withdrew her hand just enough to sit back a little, though her eyes never left mine. "You know," she said gently, "you don't hide your feelings as well as you think." Her words hit me like a small spark. My chest tightened, my breath catching before I could form a reply. Her friend tilted her head, her dark eyes calm but searching. "She's right," she added, her tone softer, more deliberate. "We've both noticed the way you look at us." I froze, every nerve alive. Part of me wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, to retreat back into safe territory. But the truth was sitting in the open now, and the weight of their eyes made it impossible to run from. I tried to speak, my voice low and unsteady. I'm sorry if it seemed—" "Don't apologize," my teacher interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "There's nothing wrong with it." Her friend's hand pressed lightly against mine, a reassuring squeeze that sent a quiet rush through me. "It's honest," she said, "and it takes more courage than you realize." The room seemed to exhale around us. My heart pounded, but slowly, the fear gave way to something else, a trembling kind of relief. Because for so long, I had carried those unspoken feelings like a weight, certain they were mine alone. And now, here they were, acknowledged without judgment, without rejection. "I didn't plan any of this," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The way you both are, the way you make me feel." I paused, searching for the right words. "It's like I come alive around you, and I don't know what to do with that." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then my teacher reached for my hand, covering it where her friend's fingers already rested. The two touches overlapped, steady and warm, anchoring me in a way that made my chest ache with something I couldn't name. "You don't have to do anything," she said softly. "Not now. Just let yourself feel it." Her friend gave a small nod, her gaze holding mine with quiet steadiness. "Sometimes," she whispered, "that's enough." The three of us sat there, hands intertwined, the silence no longer heavy but full of a tenderness that surprised me, a fragile but undeniable truth shared between us. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just possibility anymore. It was something real, something fragile, something beginning. Time seemed to stretch in that small living room, as though the outside world had faded away. The three of us sat close, our hands still touching, the lamplight soft against the walls. It was strange. I had expected awkwardness after everything that had been said, but instead I felt a calm settling over me, a quiet steadiness that felt almost unreal. No one hurried to speak. My teacher leaned back slightly, though she left her hand over mine, her thumb tracing the faintest pattern against my skin. Her friend shifted closer, not pressing, not asking for more, just letting her shoulder rest lightly against mine. The closeness no longer felt tentative. It felt natural, as though this was always where we were meant to end up. We talked again, but differently now. The conversation slowed, softened. We weren't filling space anymore. We were sharing it. My teacher told me about the first time she had met her friend years ago, how they had built their bond through late-night talks and laughter that stretched until dawn. Her friend added her side of the story, teasing gently, her voice low and warm. Listening to them, I realized what I had stepped into, not just affection, but something built on years of trust, of shared lives. And somehow, impossibly, they had chosen to let me be part of it. I found myself laughing more easily, my nerves dissolving into something gentler. Every glance, every small brush of a hand or shoulder carried meaning now, and none of us needed to name it aloud. The air was alive with quiet understanding. Eventually, the hour grew late. The room had dimmed, the tea forgotten, the streets outside fallen into deeper silence. My teacher rose first, smoothing her hair back with a soft smile. "It's time we let you go," she said, though her voice carried a reluctance that made my chest ache. Her friend stood as well, moving with the same calm grace she had shown all night. Together, they walked me to the door. The hallway light spilled faintly across the floor, and I realized I didn't want to step outside. Not yet, not away from this. But goodbyes have their own rhythm. My teacher stood close, her eyes warm as she reached up to brush her fingers lightly against my cheek. The touch was gentle, mothering almost, yet something in it made me draw in a sharp breath. "Thank you for tonight," she whispered. Her friend took my hand, squeezing it softly, her thumb lingering against my palm. She didn't say much, only held my gaze, and in that silence was a promise that this wasn't the end, that what had begun tonight would not vanish with the closing of a door. I stepped outside into the cool night air, my pulse still racing, their touches still warm on my skin. Behind me, the doorway glowed softly, framing them both as they watched me go. And as I walked down the quiet street, I realized I carried something with me. Not just the memory of their hands or their eyes, but the certainty that this night had marked a beginning. A beginning born of trust, of warmth, of two women who had seen me more clearly than I had ever been seen before. The world outside felt the same, but I was not.